Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Summer. Thank you, all of you. I'm Dan Shah. I'm the Director for Research and for Policy Insight at the British Council, but I'm also a newcomer. This is my first visit to Uzbekistan. It's my first visit wearing a new British Council hat to this part of the world, and it's the first time I've got to be part of one of our events that brings together the higher education perspective and the languages one. So thank you for the experience of yesterday, and you all succeeded in making me feel very humble. This isn't my area of research expertise, and I felt like I've learned a huge amount from you, and yes, been set some really clear exam questions that we can work on today and over the next few years. But also, I felt like I got a really clear sense of the importance of English in higher education, but also the clear non-identity between EMI and the English that can help achieve the outcomes that we want in higher education, and that those are not exhausted by the conversation about EMI. I won't try to add anything in depth to what Tony and others presented yesterday in their excellent summary, but I will try to add something different in framing today in terms of breadth and situate what we're doing here in this room and this convening and this conversation in a wider context, in the wider context of what we know about international education, about the way the world is going, about international relationships, both in terms of what we know as a thinking as well as a doing organization around the world in the British Council, but also in terms of what I see as a newcomer less than a year into the role, but having worked as a country director for the UK's Research and Innovation Organisation in Asia, as a policy leader for Universities UK, and as a policy maker in a UK government department. But I was really struck last night in some of our conversations about the long arc of history here, that actually higher education in English is a relatively recent invention in England. For the majority of the time that we have had universities in the United Kingdom, education has been mostly in Latin. It was only at some point in the 19th century that the requirement for a science degree that you sit modules in classical Greek was dropped. And it was the norm for most of the founding period of European higher education that scholars studied in a classical language like Latin. It was the common language of Latin which enabled Erasmus to travel freely to Cambridge and teach there and then go back to where he'd originally started in the Netherlands. And even if we unpeel another layer of the onion, before that there was a lingua franca in Arabic. Al-Azhar was founded before any university in Europe. But many of the people in Egypt would not yet then have been speaking Arabic. They would have known about Greek libraries, they would have been speaking Coptic. And Ibn Sina, I think, as it's properly pronounced, was born in Uzbekistan, spoke in Persian, wrote in Arabic, and was translated into Latin so that Western Europeans who spoke English or French could read him and incorporate through him his own learning, the additionalities that were brought to it from Indian mathematics and from his reinterpretation of the classical works of Greek antiquity. And another layer below that, this was not the first time that a common language had aided international mobility. And I was just reading on the plane on the way over here that international students were coming from the wider Buddhist world in the centuries before the birth of Christ through Tashkent down to North India to study in the common language of the Pali Canon in Nalanda before going back to places like China or Korea, usually via the sea route through Sri Lanka. So in a sense, the common language has always been here in the world of international higher education since we've had higher education. It has always been international and collaborative. What has changed in the last century or so is that it has become mass, that it's something that so many people participate in, and we have the hope that so many more will participate in. It has become standardized through print language. It has become one where English is the majority language of science, but it's also English is a peculiar language. in that it's one in which the lexical majority does not actually come from Anglo-Saxon, but from imported words and roots from Latin, from Greek, from other languages, from Punjabi, from Arabic. This may not be the vocabulary of Dr. Johnson's dictionary, but it is the vocabulary of the technical languages which dominate the world around us. So I'll canter through the rest, but I thought I should give you that perspective. That I think there is a much bigger picture here than we can address in the one conversation about English. So we, as the British Council, take our research and our policy insight not as a way to duplicate what the academic community can do, but as a way to create useful new knowledge to further our mission and to work with those in policy and in academia to help them achieve theirs. We have expertise, of course, in English, but also in other languages, and we have been working for 10 years to understand language teaching in other languages in the United Kingdom. We also have expertise in education. We have been producing a series of reports on the shape of global higher education, but also in the arts, in culture, in the role, for example, of the arts in promoting peace in troubled areas around the world, and in what I would call the conditions for cooperation. What are the drivers of trust in each other as peoples and as countries? And for example, if you just look at the green scattered diagram, you don't need the precise details, but what it's showing is the things that drive trust in each other in other countries include not only the quality of our universities or our culture, but how welcoming we are to other people and how we treat each other fairly. And what we are learning from our own work and that of others is that international higher education brings enormous benefits. And by international, I mean this in the full spectrum of the world. Exchanges of people, of ideas, and of opportunities in and out. It is not synonymous with Western, it is not synonymous with English, but it does bring tremendous benefits. Student mobility alone is positively associated with outcomes for both countries. And we want to send more of our young people and our students overseas to get those benefits, as well as to continue to welcome students to come to the UK. It's positively associated with increased research collaboration. There is not a trade-off between these two dimensions of the core university mission. And increased international research collaboration is consistently associated with higher quality, as shown through field-weighted citation impact. And we know that mobile research staff are frequently the most productive, and those that move in and then back again to their home countries, even more productive than those who relocate once. And we know that students, when they come back home, maintain links in research, in trade, in cultural associations that carry with them through their lives and benefit their wider communities. And we know that students with international experience have higher degree outcomes, are likely to progress faster, are more likely to respond to surveys saying that they are happier and with a higher income in their roles. The research challenge, of course, is to work out what is causation and what is attribution. It may be that it is the more able and the more outgoing students who choose to take advantage of these opportunities. But we know that we have challenges, for example, in our own outward mobility, in increasing the equality and the diversity of the people who have these experiences, and we're keen to learn from other people. We know that those experiences bring benefits to the students as seen by the employers. The students gain international experience, but also they are more likely to be involved in internal innovation. They are more likely to have the intercultural competencies which employers seek, even if the roles themselves are not ones which involve international travel or international negotiations. The competencies are ones which are readily deployable in an increasingly complex and changing world. And we know that policymakers around the world are recognizing these benefits. This shouldn't be a surprise. We know from our own work over several years through the Shape of Global Higher Education series that there's a number of positive drivers here. All of the data we have put up available through a portal, so you or your colleagues or the ministries you choose to refer this to can go and play with it, so I won't rehearse it. But it does show us, of the 57 countries that we've assessed, the vast majority, 47, already have internationalization strategies available. The spider chart at the top shows you the scores for a different number of countries on a different number of variables, and you can play with it how you want. But the line chart shows you the changes in the overall assessment in the last 3 or 4 years for countries in terms of their national support. And the scatter graph shows you the regression that shows that national systems here have a role in increasing internationalization. It's positively associated with the increase in the HE system's international experience, and there's a virtuous circle here. Internationalism increases the quality of your domestic international research, education, and knowledge exchange. And in so doing, it increases your propensity and your ability to collaborate internationally. And it's one of the ways that you can think about addressing some of these pipeline problems which apply to all areas of education policy, which is precisely because you need to be educating the people who will be educators in a system. You need to be doing so over the long term, and every change that you want to make, you needed to have started planning before you realized that you were beginning. And we know that language plays a vital role, as we heard yesterday, in enabling the internationalization of higher education. And this isn't just about English, this is about a shared language being important. So we want young people in the United Kingdom to get better at learning other languages. We know that there's bad news in the declining numbers learning German, there's good news in the increasing numbers learning Spanish and learning Mandarin, and we want to continue to broaden that exposure and broaden the number of languages that they learn. So it's not just about EMI, but a number of governments have chosen that as a way forward. But we know that shared language enables partnership, it enables exchange, it increases employability both directly because of the demands of an increasingly globalized, knowledge-intensive labor market, but also because of what it can give in terms of intercultural competencies, but it opens up affordances and possibilities for researchers and educators because it makes accessible curricula or media, whether it's formal journals, whether it's increasing online access that wouldn't be available otherwise. And the benefits that come from the shared linguistic competencies are far wider than those that accrue to the individuals or even just to higher education. They extend to the whole of society. Shared languages are positively associated in a corpus of economic literature with increased trade. A shared language can relate to a 44% increase in trade. They're associated with increased foreign direct investment, and this is going in both directions. The ratio is at its greatest, where the languages are shared national languages, but it's still strong in terms of shared second languages. And there is an additional strength in some of the research, specifically from English, over and above the shared nature of the language itself, which says something, I think, about the nature of English as the shared language for global commerce. A common language, of course, as you would expect, increases tourism, again, in both directions, but it also increases, even when it's a second language, the likelihood of foreign direct investment. And at least one report, Hutchinson from about 15 years ago, found that English as a second language was associated with both larger imports and larger exports from the shared company, even above the positive association from having shared English as a first language. So the bonus from the additional sharing of English could be very significant for a country which is never going to adopt English as a first language. But it's crucial to remember that this is mutual. This is about trade. This is about a relationship that goes in both directions. And the importance of that mutuality, of that relationship flowing in both directions, of the communication being something that is not just about transmission, but is about building a relationship, is what's most important in underlying the associations that are revealed by the statistics about trade or about citations or about student flows. Because ultimately, this is about improving the ability to cooperate between peoples, both as individuals and as institutions like universities, and between countries. And this is a large chunk of the research that we do at the British Council, isn't only in our areas of expertise, in education, in the arts, in civil society. It is also in what we call cultural relations, the mutual building of long-term relationships, of shared understanding, of the ability to cooperate even where we have differences. And we know that a shared language is important and positively associated for increasing trust and for increasing attraction. It enables the other connections of study, of doing business, of consuming each other's arts and literature and understanding each other's history. And this, again, all of the data is available on our website, so I just show it as an illustration. Shows you the difference between the perceptions of a number of characteristics positively associated with trust between people who have and who have not yet studied or done business with countries across the G20. And what this shows us is that if you've interacted with these countries, and this is not just the UK, this is China, this is Japan, this is Russia, this is the US, so very different societies and cultures, where you have collaborated, you increase your likelihood not only of thinking that they're good at business or at science or at the arts, but you increase your belief that they contribute their fair share to international development. You increase your understanding that they treat other people fairly and that they work constructively with other countries. And these are the conditions for cooperation. And I don't know what the next 30-odd years is going to bring. I know that we referred yesterday to some of the stats from Charles Schwab work on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This is just another version of the same thing. So we know that, for example, there will be disruption in the labour market from increased automation. We don't know exactly where it will lie. We know that many of the jobs the people we're educating now will be doing in 2030 do not yet exist. But more importantly, many of the jobs that will exist, even if they have the same titles, will have different components in terms of the skill set. So the things that they're likely to need are the things that are least likely to be automated. And we don't know precisely what they are, but I think we can make an educated guess that they'll be to do with communication. They'll be to do with teamwork. They'll be to do with cooperating with people who come from other parts of the world or other parts of their own society. They'll be to do with creativity. We don't know exactly how we're going to be meeting all of the challenges of the 2030s, but we do know that every country in the world has signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals. This is not something that can be achieved by anyone on their own. We also know that the way that they are distributed is uneven. So the top right there is a graph that shows you countries by the size of their populations, and the color code gives you the Human Development Index. So we know that we all have to work together, including countries you can barely see on the map like the UK, to address the challenges that are shared, especially across Africa and Asia. But we also know that we will not achieve these goals for the whole of humanity if we leave people behind. And that includes the 1% of people who are forced immobile from their homes. And by their very nature, being a refugee is an international need for others to help. We also know that if we pick just one of these challenges, but perhaps the most pressing, that climate change is the classic definition of a collective action problem. It is not one where any individual or individual country can do it on their own, but all have to be involved. And in order for all to be involved in the classic game theory dilemma, we need to be able to trust each other. And to do that, we need to be able to understand each other and to keep communicating. So we, for our part, want to keep learning. We will keep doing our research, and we will keep listening to people like you and what we can learn from you. And we want to learn more about the role of languages, especially English. We want to know more about how other people see the world and us. We want to know more about the shape of global higher education and where the world is going. But we want to know more about what enables us to trust each other and to work together. Thank you very much.